Our journey begins in the middle of the 7th century, a time of profound change for the young Islamic community. The era of the first 4 caliphs, known as the Rashidun, or rightly guided, was coming to a close. These leaders had been companions of the Prophet Muhammad, and their rule was characterized by a close connection to the origins of Islam in Medina. The Islamic state they governed was expanding rapidly, but it was also facing its first major internal tests. It was out of this crucible of political turmoil and civil strife that a new power would emerge, one that would transform the Caliphate from a patriarchal leadership into a dynastic, hereditary monarchy. This was the birth of the Umayyad Caliphate, a dynasty that would rule from 661 to 750 CE and shape the course of Islamic and world history forever. The transition from the Rashidun Caliphate to Umayyad rule was not a peaceful handover of power. It was born from the ashes of the first fitna, or civil war, a conflict that left deep and lasting scars on the Muslim community. The assassination of the 3rd Caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, himself a member of the Umayyad clan, in 656 CE plunged the Islamic State into chaos. The Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib, was acclaimed as the 4th Caliph, but his authority was immediately challenged. Among the most powerful of his challengers was Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the governor of Syria, who used his position to demand justice for his kinsman Uthman and skillfully positioned himself as a rival for the caliphate. The ensuing conflict pitted the supporters of Ali, based in Iraq, against Muawiyah's disciplined Syrian forces. The pivotal confrontation came at the Battle of Siffin in 657 CE. The battle was inconclusive and ended in a controversial arbitration that ultimately weakened Ali's position and strengthened Muawiyah's. Following the turbulent early years, the Umayyad dynasty was solidified and brought to its zenith by a series of exceptionally capable rulers. The most significant of these was Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, who ascended to the throne in 685 CE amidst the chaos of the Second Fitna. Abd al-Malik, a decisive and ruthless leader, spent the first decade of his reign systematically crushing his opponents and reunifying the Islamic world under his firm control. Abd al-Malik's reforms were profound and far-reaching. Recognizing the need for a unified state apparatus, he made Arabic the official language of the bureaucracy. He also introduced a new Islamic coinage. These new gold dinars and silver dirhams were stamped with Quranic verses and the Declaration of Faith, serving as powerful symbols of Islamic sovereignty. Abd al-Malik asserted the religious authority of the Caliphate in a way his predecessors had not. His reign is also remembered for its monumental architectural legacy, most famously the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Constructed on the Temple Mount, a site holy to both Jews and Christians, this magnificent shrine was a bold statement of Islam's permanence and superiority. The Umayyad era was, above all, an age of relentless and astonishingly successful military expansion. Building on the foundations laid by the Rashidun Caliphs, Umayyad armies pushed the frontiers of the Islamic Empire to their furthest extent. The conquests were not a single, centrally planned campaign, but rather a series of opportunistic advances driven by ambitious generals and the promise of wealth and land. In the West, the primary challenge was conquering the vast expanse of North Africa, a region the Byzantines called the Maghrib. The process was slow and arduous, marked by fierce resistance from the indigenous Berber populations. In 711 CE, a largely Berber army led by the commander Tariq ibn Ziyad crossed the strait that would later bear his name, Jabal Tariq, or Gibraltar, and swiftly defeated the Visigothic kingdom that had ruled Spain for centuries. Simultaneously, equally dramatic conquests were unfolding in the east. Umayyad armies, under the command of brilliant generals like Qutayba ibn Muslim, pushed from the Persian heartland into the lands beyond the Oxus River. They captured the legendary Silk Road cities of Bukhara and Samarkand, bringing the lucrative trade routes and the diverse peoples of Central Asia under Islamic rule. Managing such a vast and heterogeneous empire was an immense challenge that required pragmatism and innovation. The Umayyads did not, and could not, rule through force alone. They inherited and adapted the sophisticated administrative systems of the empires they had conquered. For much of their rule, Christian and Zoroastrian bureaucrats, who possessed the necessary skills and local knowledge, continued to run the day-to-day operations of the state. The social structure of the Umayyad state was hierarchical. At the top were the ruling Arab Muslims, who formed a military and administrative elite. Below them were the non-Arab converts to Islam known as Mawali. Despite sharing the same faith, the Mawali were often treated as second-class citizens. At the base of the social pyramid were the dhimmi, or protected peoples. This status was granted to non-Muslim monotheists, primarily Christians, Jews, and in some regions, Zoroastrians. Despite their reputation among later historians as worldly kings rather than pious caliphs, the Umayyads were great patrons of the arts and presided over the first major flourishing of a distinctively Islamic visual culture. The Great Mosque of Damascus, built by Caliph al-Walid I, is the supreme example of this style. Its walls were adorned with vast, glittering mosaics depicting idyllic landscapes of trees and rivers, a representation of the Quranic paradise. Beyond the cities, the Umayyad Caliphs and princes built an intriguing series of rural residences and retreats, often referred to as desert castles. These were not primarily military fortresses, but rather sprawling complexes that served as centers for agriculture, diplomacy with local Bedouin tribes, and leisure. Palaces like Qusayr Amra in modern-day Jordan are famous for their remarkable frescoes, which depict scenes of hunting, bathing, and courtly life, as well as astronomical charts and portraits of defeated kings. While the Umayyad period is not as famous for scientific and scholarly pursuits as the later Abbasid era, it laid the essential groundwork. The process of translating Greek, Syriac, and Persian texts into Arabic began under their rule, particularly in fields like medicine, chemistry, and philosophy. For the vast majority of people living under Umayyad rule, life continued much as it had before the conquests, especially in the early decades. A farmer in Egypt, a merchant in Syria, or an artisan in Persia would have found their daily routines largely unchanged. The establishment of new garrison cities like Kufa and Basra in Iraq and Fustat in Egypt created bustling urban centers where Arab soldiers and settlers mixed with the local population. For an Arab Muslim, life was often defined by one's tribal affiliation and role in the state. Soldiers and their families settled in the garrison towns and received stipends from the government, which gave them a privileged economic status. For a non-Arab who chose to convert to Islam, life was more complex. As a Mawali, or client, they would typically need to affiliate themselves with an Arab tribe. While conversion freed them from paying the jizya tax, they often faced social discrimination. For the non-Muslim dhimmi population, which constituted the majority for the entire Umayyad period, life was a mixture of continuity and adaptation. They continued to be governed by their own religious laws and leaders, but were subject to certain restrictions. The Umayyad Caliphate, for all its power and grandeur, was plagued by deep-seated internal divisions and constant challenges to its authority. From its very inception, the dynasty's legitimacy was contested. The supporters of Ali ibn Abi Talib and his descendants, who would evolve into the Shia, never accepted the Umayyads as rightful leaders. This opposition frequently erupted into open and bloody rebellions, most famously the revolt of Hussein ibn Ali at Karbala, which became a powerful symbol of martyrdom and resistance against Umayyad tyranny. Perhaps the most dangerous internal weakness was the escalating rivalry among the Arab tribes themselves. The Umayyad military machine was built upon a delicate balance of power between two large tribal confederations, the northern Arabs, known as Qais, and the southern Arabs, known as Yaman or Kalb. This tribal factionalism frequently paralyzed the state and led to violent clashes. Finally, the growing discontent of the Mawali, or non-Arab Muslims, presented a profound and ultimately fatal challenge. Concentrated in the eastern provinces like Khorasan, the Mawali felt alienated by the Arab-centric policies of the Umayyad state. This widespread sense of grievance created a fertile breeding ground for revolutionary movements. The downfall of the Umayyad dynasty was not a single event, but the culmination of all the internal pressures that had been building for decades. The final catalyst came from a rival clan within the Prophet Muhammad's extended family, the Abbasids. The Abbasid Revolution, led by the brilliant and enigmatic general Abu Muslim, erupted in Khorasan in the 740s. Unfurling black banners as their standard, Abu Muslim's army rapidly gained momentum, uniting Arab and non-Arab rebels under a common cause. In 750 of the Common Era, at the Battle of the Zab River, the Abbasid forces decisively crushed the main Umayyad army, led by the last Caliph, Marwan II. The fall of Damascus was followed by a ruthless and systematic extermination of the Umayyad family. Only one prominent Umayyad prince, Abd al-Rahman, managed to escape the slaughter. After a perilous 5-year journey, he fled across North Africa and arrived in Al-Andalus, or Spain, where he established a new Umayyad emirate in Cordoba. The Umayyad Caliphate's legacy is immense and complex. They forged the first great Islamic empire, transforming the caliphate into a durable and powerful institution. They oversaw the conquest of a territory that stretched from the Atlantic to the Indus and established Arabic as a world language. Their patronage of art and architecture produced some of Islam's most iconic monuments. However, their rule also created the deep political and sectarian fissures, Sunni Shia, Arab Mawali, that would define much of subsequent Islamic history. They were the architects of the Islamic Empire, but the foundations they laid contained the very cracks that would ultimately lead to their own demise and the rise of their Abbasid successors.